So my name is Ayana Smith-Kooiman, she, her pronouns. I'm a legislative assistant at the Minnesota Senate for Senator Ayana Smith-Kooiman.
This is What Next, the Adoptee Rights Podcast. I'm Gregory Luce, the Executive Director of Adoptees United and an adoptee rights lawyer. I'm also an adopted person, born and adopted in the District of Columbia. Each episode, my guests and I explore all sorts of topics around adoptee rights, whether it's legislation, stories, news, or recent developments. And in that, we often find ourselves marveling and also laughing at the frequent absurdities and complications of being an adopted person in the United States or wherever you are. This is one of a series of intermittent episodes that are part of what we're calling Legislative Boot Camp, where I'm talking to legislators, staffers, advocates, and as many people who will talk to me about how to pursue or oppose legislation, whether related to birth records, U.S. citizenship, rescinding an adoption, or advocating for the dignity and autonomy for all adopted people. In this one and one other, released together, I talk with Max Albach and Ayana Smith-Kooiman, two legislative staffers in Michigan and Minnesota, where there are bills that have been recently enacted or are currently pending. But it's less about the bills. It's more about the process, especially in how to work well with legislative staff, or the people I consider the backbone of legislative work. So welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. I've known you for probably less than a year now, but it was a very important time for politics in Minnesota generally, and then also politics for adoptee rights in Minnesota, because we passed a bill that would allow all Minnesota-born adopted people to request and obtain their original birth record. So congrats to that. Senator Ayana Smith-Kooiman was the primary sponsor and was really a leader in getting it through, but it took a ton of other work from other people, including staffers, to get that done. So I really appreciate all the work that you did to help do that. And I understand you're also an adopted person.
I am, yeah.
Yeah. And born and adopted in Wisconsin.
Yep.
Yep. So hopefully we'll get over to that state too and see what we can do. But I'm actually kind of happy that we did Minnesota first.
People think of Minnesota as like the Wisconsin big sister, so.
Exactly. What got you into this work? I know that you were politically involved in college and probably prior to then as well.
So truly, I got my kind of political awakening interest in politics in college. I think when I was in high school, it's more so I was interested in the history part of things, and kind of had like a very small little dabble of interest in American politics. But what got me to the Senate actually was COVID.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
I was supposed to study abroad my junior year of college in the fall, and that was at the height of the COVID pandemic. And so all of our study abroads got canceled. And so I just had a semester where I was like, well, I can go do something if I want to. And I had a friend of mine, a former classmate, text me about an internship opportunity because she was a year above me. And so she was moving around in this organization. And she was like, do you want to take over my internship? My boss asked me who I thought would be a good idea or a good person to take over this position. And I thought of you. And so, I know you're busy, but if you want to do it, let me know. And I looked up this organization. It was called Gender Justice in Minnesota.
Right.
And I was like, oh, it looks really cool. They're really focused on equity and people's rights. And that's something I'm really interested in. They do litigation and public education. And I was a legal studies minor at the time. So it was like the best of both worlds. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that. And it just so happened the advocacy director and who I'd be working under as the intern was Ayana Smith-Kooiman. And so she kind of just took me under her wing right away. And I did a lot of really awesome work for gender justice for 2 years. And when she decided she wanted to run for the Senate, she said, hey, you want to come with? And so she invited me to be on her campaign team, and invited me to be her legislative assistant if she won. And thankfully she won.
Right.
And here I am.
And part of the movement in Minnesota where the Senate took over the majority. So,
Yeah,
which is
it was
super
really
exciting
awesome.
time. Yeah. And she was one of those new senators. I mean, coming over from the House, of course. But yeah, so that must have been super exciting.
Yeah, everything happens for a reason because I was supposed to be in Ireland.
So this will age both of us because my son graduated from the same college, McAllister College in St. Paul, as you did in the same year. And he had that same experience where he was supposed to go to London
Yeah.
for an economics thing, but COVID shut that all down, and he basically was in his house for most of his sophomore and junior year. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
I was doing Zoom University like everybody else
yeah,
and,
yeah.
a little internship on the side. It was great.
Are you interested in politics beyond this? I mean, meaning that, I mean, as I watched your work, I would say, she's going to run for office someday. I'm pretty sure.
I have, since I was like a child, my friends' family like, oh, Ayana's be president one day, and you go into your studies thinking those things, and now that I have a little bit more of an understanding of politics, and I've gone through college, I could potentially run for a higher office, but it's not an ambition of mine right now.
Okay, interesting.
I like being the behind the scenes person that's helping keep everything organized, so that the person who is in office can go do their thing.
Right. And then just so people know, your office, which is really not quite an office, you're outside of the senator's her office,
Hmm.
and it's basically a desk. It's a higher desk where you sit behind it, and basically you're there, and it's as if anyone can just come up and start talking to you. And I imagine as a staffer, one, it's hard to sort of get respect from people who don't understand what your role is, first of all. And two, it's believing that you are just open and available to talk with no matter what you're doing. How have you managed that?
Yeah, it's something that I definitely had to get used to because previously I just had never worked in an office. And let alone one where I'm just exposed to everybody in the hallway who's going about their day. Um, I think one way of managing it was just, if I'm doing a task that doesn't necessarily have to be done right away, I can engage with the person in front of me. But one thing about this role that a lot of people maybe don't wouldn't realize is that it's very customer service like in the hiring process. Even they were just like, if you had customer service experience, it was like a leg up for you
Hmm.
because a lot of it is being able to, obviously, like we're government people aren't customers necessarily, but being able to engage with someone who's in front of you in a way where they're getting their needs met or they're getting the answers that they need while also still being able to navigate, I used to work food service, so
Right,
being able to like do the stuff behind the counter like restocking or
right,
getting food ready while also being able to like take a customer's order. That's the type of energy it is when you're like working in an environment like this. And so part of it is very just clear communication of just like, oh, can you give me 1 second? Let me finish this thing. I'll be with you in a moment.
right,
I have like forms at the front of my desk sometimes that helps me be able to keep doing what I'm doing while they're filling out the form so that then I have better understanding of what they need in documentation.
right,
So that if they come back and be like, oh, I asked for this thing and was like, did you? Let me pull out this piece of paper
right.
and write it down and like look at it and see.
And I thought you had some brilliant signs on your desk as well, saying, I'm in a meeting right now, or hey, at least understand that I may be doing something right now that I can't talk to you. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And
yeah.
I think that kind of like spread throughout the office with like the proliferation of Zoom meetings is that because I don't have that door or that wall,
Hmm.
people will see me looking at a computer and think, oh, she's, just typing or emailing. And it's like, no, I'm in like a full a full
Right,
meeting. And so we have those little pieces, like those little paper tents saying, Zoom meeting in progress or,
right,
you know, quiet please, this thing is happening. And so it's all about being able to communicate either verbally or non-verbally
right,
with the person that's coming up to you that, hey, either I can or I can't talk right now, or, it's going to be a moment.
right. Do you recall when you first became aware of this bill, the Adoptee Rights Bill, and whether Senator McQuaid was signing on to it actually?
Oh, do I remember when we got it?
Because I remember emailing her saying, "Hey, would
Yeah,
you be interested?" And then she said, "Hey, you're on our list to talk to."
yeah. So it's hard to remember exactly when things come in, but one thing that I adopted when I was working for Senator McQuaid back at Gender Justice was a spreadsheet. I am the spreadsheet queen of the office.
All right,
And so anytime someone would email about either a bill or a meeting or just anything, I'd put it into the spreadsheet right away just so I have a record of it. And because she's just so busy, sometimes you only have like 5 minutes. Like people get mad when they don't get meetings with her, and I was like, girl, I don't get meetings with her either.
Right. Yeah.
And so sometimes it's like you have that 5 minutes, so it's just like I have that spreadsheet where I can hit one tab of like, okay, lobbyists, who's emailing us? Okay, Greg Luce wants to do an adoptee rights bill. Okay,
Right.
is that something you want to do? And like I can do that as she's walking from either committee to a meeting or from a meeting to her off in it's on the go. It's something that I can quickly do, take note of, and then once I'm back in my office space,
Right.
that's when I can sit down and say, okay, I'm emailing this person back, this person back, this person back.
Right. So
Now that
that's
I've got my
interesting because
answers.
I kind of imagine in my mind, oh, I sent an email to Senator McQuaid, and then suddenly she's sitting there just browsing through her emails and then reads it and then answers. But there's a different process than that because I
There
think you're
is.
doing a lot of triage to figure out what should get to her desk and what she should look at. And I think a lot of people don't understand that either. Yeah.
Yeah. So she absolutely like it's not like she doesn't have like be
Right.
isn't in her email at all. I don't want that to be the conception. But there's definitely staff in there, in the senator's inbox, just making sure that, important messages get filtered to the front, not less prioritized messages still end up on our radar, but
Hmm.
maybe the more urgent messages get taken care of first because there is like a limited window of time that any of us have with our senators.
Right. So I have a
Yeah.
really practical question. So you have an email address. The Senator McQuaid has an email address. What's the best way to communicate instead of doing both, or is that something that is best to do? Send it to both of you. Because I know that you're going to end up reading her emails anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's whatever is easiest for the person sending the email. I mean, sometimes our like the staff emails aren't always the most prevalent on a website when you're looking up who to contact or how to contact
Right.
someone. One thing that the senator and I have set up is she has like an out of office message that automatically goes out when people email her
Hmm.
that tells them to email me if it's a scheduling request or something else. So that then people know, okay, hey, if I really want this to get seen, let me email her assistant. And that's something that we found very helpful when having people email the office.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You have to dig around to find your email address or other staffers' email address. You're not hiding it, but it's just something I think that
Yeah.
you would get
It's not the
inundated.
first thing you see when you
Right.
go and look up the senator
Right.
that you're trying to talk to.
And this, I mean, this is related. There is a contact form that is often used instead of encouraging emails, and I'm wondering how effective that is to use instead of direct email because my understanding, at least in Minnesota and many other states, it may actually prioritize some emails if it's coming from a constituent, and you can tell it's a constituent from the email that they submit.
Yeah, so on the back end of those email forms, we can kind of give it different designation rules just by communicating with the data support people with the program. And so one thing that I purposely did for our office is that if it is an email directly from a constituent, it goes straight to her actual Outlook inbox.
Interesting.
Whereas if it's not necessarily an urgent email from a constituent, it will go to a different website and then we can triage it there of like, okay, this is about this topic. Okay, let's, if we don't know as much about the topic, because we get emailed the gambit. And one thing that I think is a misconception about state politics is like there's not an army of staff people
Right.
to answer to
Right.
answer all of the emails that we get. It's literally just me and my senator answering these questions. And so if we don't know as much about a topic, what we'll do is we'll email our research staff and be like, hey, we're getting some emails about, XYZ topic. Do you have more information about where they could be getting this information, whether it's good or bad or maybe misleading? Because there's a lot of organizations that, put out email alerts to say, email your son about this thing. And it could be an accurate email about something that they want us to do or don't want us to do, or it could be something that's intentionally misleading. And so we kind of have to help filter that out and then figure out what the response is and
Right.
ask. I very much defer to my senator of like, hey, how do you feel about this issue?
Right.
And then we come up with the answer to answer the questions.
Are you ever in the position, and I assume staffers are, where you have done quite a bit of research on a bill and she asks what you think she should do? Or, and I'm not sure if this is something you can discuss, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's more so if she's putting together a bill, sometimes she'll just ask me like, does it make sense? Because one thing that our office is really big on is just making sure the average person can understand what's happening in
Right.
their government or in politics. And so some because I'm not, a policymaker or a litigator or like person in legal, sometimes she'll just ask me like, do you understand like what the bill is saying or like what it's trying to do?
Right.
And so I get the skill of learning how to read these bills, but then also, get to bring the input of like, do we really need this definition or is that the word we're trying to use here? And I get to kind of provide that feedback as someone that's somewhat outside looking in.
Right. And I imagine though on bills that you know that she supports, I mean, she may be a sponsor or it's an issue that she's very much behind. You could easily tell a constituent, oh yeah, she's
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
definitely bills out there where we have just been like, yep, she supports it.
yeah.
We're on your side on that one.
Right. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
good to go.
And I'm gonna get to sort of I call it a lightning round where I'll ask you about tactics and strategies I've seen people use and whether they're effective at all or not. Um, so let's actually we could start with that. So mass emails. Let's say it's a call to action sent out by an organization, and suddenly you're seeing hundreds of emails coming into your inbox or the senator's inbox. How effective is that?
It can be really effective, especially if it's from like a reputable organization. Because then if it's not on our radar, it suddenly is. For example, I would like hear about we would get like a lot of gun bills at random intervals throughout the session about different things. And I was like, okay, who's talking about guns? And so like you can have that moment of like, okay, let me get on Google and be like, okay, who's talking about guns in Minnesota right now, and kind of
Right.
get a broader picture of like what is the public opinion or public landscape of where we are with different pieces of legislation. So I would say it's an effective method of communicating, and we all try to answer those emails as quickly as we can.
Even though there's hundreds, if not sometimes, like let's say, let's pick a huge hot button issue, abortion, which was a big issue in this past session, and you all passed a remarkable legislation to support that right. How I imagine you got thousands of emails, maybe even attacking the senator because she is behind one of these bills. How effective is it something where you already know the position of the of the senator and it's just basically how useful is that at all?
Yeah. So one thing that our office tries to do when we get those mass emails is educate, because quite a bit of backlash people may have towards bills such as abortion is maybe not fully understanding what it is, what abortion is, or what the law is going to do. For example, we had a repealer law where there was a court case in Minnesota that made unconstitutional a lot of the abortion restrictions we had in state statute, and so my senator, Senator McQuaid, created a bill to repeal a lot of those laws that had been
Right,
deemed unconstitutional. And one of them was the Infant Born Alive
right,
Act, which is a false creation of politics, essentially saying like if someone has an abortion and it fails, like care needs to be provided to the child, which is already done. And so we had to explain to people that later in pregnancy abortions aren't called late term abortions; they're fetal anomalies, or there are issues that arise in a wanted pregnancy that results in someone having to terminate their pregnancy through an induction of labor. And so we use moments like that when we're getting mass emails that's maybe attacking or maybe not understanding a bill to say, this is what you've been told. I understand that. However, here's what's actually happening.
right,
And some people are really receptive to it. I've definitely had people either via email or on the phone when we're conversing about it, either even if they didn't totally change their mind, they're less upset about what they thought was happening because we took the moment to educate them. And
right.
so I think those form emails, those mass emails, even if they are attacking legislation that's happening, we see it as an opportunity to provide some education or nuance to what can be really a heated discussion or very like vulnerable moment for
Right.
people.
Yeah, the other thing I've realized too is that with dealing with, well, your office and other offices too, is that you need to have a sense of patience, not you, the advocates. And so when I send you an email, I would say, okay, sit on this. She will get back to me. And you do. And
Hmm.
so I know, I think that the thing that I wish to get across to other advocates out there, especially in this space of adoptee rights, is that this isn't the only issue you're working on
Hmm.
by far.
Yeah.
And we have to be patient a lot. It's a lot of hurry up and wait kind of thing, where things are just sort of sitting there for a while and then suddenly, boom, we're on for a committee hearing or something's going to happen with the bill. And that a lack of an instant response or even a response within 2 days isn't an indication that you're ignoring it. You just don't have the bandwidth or the capacity at that time to reply. And
Yeah,
so,
or maybe I just don't have all the information that I need to
right,
give you a full response. Yeah.
right. So I think that's a really good point, and I think a lot of people don't understand the immensity of the legislation that you all are dealing with all the time. So I hope to get that across. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you do a
Well,
great job. Yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
Well, because even when I said we like sometimes we'll email our research staff to be like, hey, I don't know as much about this issue. Can you give me some more information about where this is coming from? Even if I put together a great response, I still need approval. Like, because I'm not the sender, I can't, just say stuff and be like, yep, that's it. Sometimes I definitely have to run it by her. And again, there are moments where like I'm like, oh, I've seen you all of 5 minutes this week. Okay.
right,
So it's just as much as on the advocate side is hurry up and wait, it's also hurry up and wait for us as well on our side because one thing about Minnesota is that we're a part-time legislature, so
right.
she has a full other job that
And a
she's
family. Yeah,
in a family while she's also trying to be the best legislator that she can be. And so that's another way that staff are really critical. It's just making sure that their time is being allocated in the best way that it can be.
right. What about phone calls? Like, let's say there's a call to action in which you're getting a ton of phone calls, and I can't imagine how you handle those at this point with the limited staff that senators and legislators have.
Yeah. I will say phones can be scary because you never like email, at least you can kind of diffuse through words and you're not face
Well, you're
phones, like
you're of the
you are
generation
on.
too where you don't answer the phone. Like I don't either, and unless I know who it is. But you don't have a choice
Yeah.
at the office.
Sometimes you can recognize the numbers and be like, okay, never mind. I know who that is.
Right,
But for me, I set it up with our
right,
tech staff to get my voicemails forwarded to my inbox so that I can, click on an email and listen to the voicemail because I'm not, as you said, with us, we're not when we're at the desk, maybe not able to always answer the phone, even though it's right there because we're
right,
doing something else, or I'm away from a desk either at committee or running around the Capitol complex doing other stuff. And so what's been helpful for me is being able to have voicemails forwarded to my inbox so I can listen to it anywhere. And maybe if I can't answer them direct, like if they had called me and I picked up and I couldn't answer their question, we'd have to play phone tag. This way, I have the opportunity to listen to the voicemail and, take notes and go and get the answers for people and then call them back with a
right,
comprehensive understanding of the better way to help them get what they need.
right. Yeah, makes sense. And I think I do the same way where most of my calls go to voicemail, which I then get a transcript of or can listen to. I think you have a similar issue that I have too, is if you were to just answer the phone, you'd be on the phone for 30 minutes with someone trying to tell you their entire story. And I
And
have this,
sometimes you just can't avoid it because
I
when
know,
I try to answer the phone as much as I can.
right. I'm actually surprised how open you are to all of that. To be honest, I mean, it just seems like I know it's customer service. I know you're constituent driven. It just seems so hard to juggle with all that's going on.
Yeah, well, one thing I try to remember is that people call expecting to not hear a real person, and I've had those calls where someone is just thrown off by the fact that a real person answered the phone.
Right,
And so I try to keep that in mind because I think it humanizes the interaction to know that, I'm hearing you, you're hearing me, we're real people on either side of this phone call. And so I think that is what motivates me to answer the phone as much as I can,
right.
is to give that person, because most people when they're calling, they just want someone to hear them.
Yeah,
Even if they don't think that we can necessarily do something, or if we know we can't, address the issue that they're talking about. A lot of it is just about being heard. And so I want to be able to be that person where if you call our office, you're going to get heard.
Do you when you just pick up the phone and answer, do you try to determine right away if they're constituent or does it really matter that much?
I try to determine if they're constituent, if they're asking for like direct support or help with something,
Right,
um, because it's just easier to understand what their needs are if they are within the district.
right,
Whereas like if someone from St. Paul called me about something and I'd be like, I don't quite understand what it is that we're trying to do because maybe I don't understand the logistics of that district quite as well.
Right.
And also it's respect for other senators.
Yeah.
Where if someone from their district is calling us and they just maybe didn't realize that we're not their district, we'll give them that we'll defer them to their actual Senate office, so that they can interact with their person,
Right.
so to speak.
And I think that's another thing that people forget, not only on top of all the legislation that you're working on to either pass or oppose or even understand, you're getting calls from constituents who have an issue with getting a real ID and they want help with navigating the state agency. I forget about that as well. Yeah. Good. It's always good in the back of an advocate's head. I mean, I know we're all advocates. I know that we want to be heard. I know that this is a super important issue, but I think we also have to have a little bit of perspective as to who's on the other end of that line and respect their time and respect their expertise, and especially how we interact with them. So I've had some really great interactions with you, but I've limited them because I know how busy you are. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
What about so when I remember, what about if I just show up at your desk and say, "Hey, I want to meet with Senator McQuaid," and I imagine you
um
get that.
but yeah, we get that a lot, especially this year because she's told me up front she has a lot of constraints on her time,
Hmm.
with her other job. A lot of it is just going to be me almost interviewing you right on the spot of like, what is it about? What's the topic? What's the ask? Do you want her to author something? Do you just want her to co-author something? Is it about a hearing request for a committee that she's in? And I try to get as much information as I can from that first interaction about what the meeting would be about before determining whether or not that's something that we can accommodate.
Right.
And again, that's where my spreadsheet comes in handy because then I take down all of this information, present it to her at a later time, and say, hey, is this something that you have time for? Is there some? Because sometimes I can discern that for myself, and make that split second decision of whether or not to grant a meeting or not. And sometimes it may be an organization I'm unfamiliar with or a bill that I'm not quite sure about, and I will need to talk to her about it. Yeah, I think that's my system. Every office has a little bit of a different system of how they handle those on the spot requests. If it's a constituent, is also very important,
Right.
because we do try to bump constituent requests up to the top of that list because that's what we are here
Right.
for is
Right.
constituent
Exactly.
driven. So just getting that type of information, if it's something that we can't meet about, what I'll try to do is I'll try to get like, one pagers or informational background material just so we are aware of the topic. And then what we'll try to do is if it's in a committee or something, like 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes, pitch it to
Right.
her before she goes to committee or before, because there's only pockets of time
Right.
and we have to try and find those pockets of time to get as much done as we can.
Right. And we had a pocket of time during that whole process where I remember you found a conference room somewhere near another committee room and she sat down with us, Senator McQuaid sat down with us for maybe 10 minutes at tops and that's all she had. She may have even had only five. And her task was to look at proposed amendments to the bill and sort of agree or not agree or change them. And it took her literally like 2 minutes to understand the full impact of those amendments. And it was so impressive how quickly she understands these bills and legislation. I know she's been there in the legislature for a while, but it was very impressive. And I'm wondering, has any of that rubbed off on what your ability to read bills and read them quickly?
I will say I cannot read them as quickly as she can, but
No.
it has helped my ability. She gave me a little nugget of responsibility about a bill she wants to do. She's like, I'm gonna let you lead this one, and it's like a labor rights bill.
Right.
And we got sent a draft from a House member, and so I'm reading this draft, and I was like, I don't think this is the right definition. I don't think we need read this definition. And I'm making all of these notes as I'm reading this bill. And then we had like maybe, about 10 minutes on a Zoom call where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go into this meeting real quick. Here are my notes. What do you think? And our notes aligned. And that's one of the, like the proud
That's
moments
awesome.
of what I do is just when I'm able to align with her and we kind of have like a mind meld moment where I was like, okay, we're on the same page.
I
So
love
it's
that.
definitely rubbed off,
Yeah.
where I'm able to read some bills and be like, oh, she's not going to think that that's important.
Right.
Or she's going to want us to change that piece. Or I have a question about this, and it's the same question she has.
Right.
And those are really fun moments for me.
Right. And I've always kind of imagined that's what the really good staffers are doing. They're sort of the whisperer for the senator, for the legislator. I mean, they begin to understand what their positions are and how they would approach things, and that again cuts down the amount of time that they have to spend on other things. So it's good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I've seen too, especially this past session, where all these trinkets and souvenirs and even food that people leave at your desk, and not your desk, but everyone's. I mean, I'm wondering how is that something kind of cool, or has it just become a burden at some point when just these boxes are overflowing? Your inbox is just overflowing with all these things.
I will say that if there's like a busy moment in sessions, such as like when deadlines are happening,
Right.
those it can get very overwhelming very quickly because everyone is emailing you at once, trying to either get a hearing or get a meeting or do these things. And it was especially overwhelming last session just because it was one of the most historic sessions we'd ever had, and
Right.
two, I was a new LA.
Right.
I started the same day session did. And so it was a very, very steep learning curve. I think going into this next session, having a year under my belt, I think it'll be less overwhelming because I have a better understanding of what the role is. And, I've created systems to deal with the onslaught of data that we get every day.
Right.
And so I'm I'm optimistic that this year will look a little different and be a little less overwhelming.
So how about like if it's really good swag, let's say, like it's a
Hmm.
cool coaster or it's cool, it's something kind of cool. It's obviously it's a trinket, it can't be worth much, but does that help sort of understand the message, or is that worthwhile? I imagine it
Um,
just depends.
Personally, I find them kind of funny, the little trinkets, because one, we have to like make sure they abide by the gift rule.
Right.
So that's the first thing truly that we all do is like, is it less than $5?
Oh, it has to
Um,
be less than five?
or something of that nature. I'm
Yeah,
not going to
something
say that I
really
know the
small. Yeah.
exact gift
Yeah.
rules, but
Right.
we check to make sure it's in compliance with the gift rule. And sometimes, we have a little joke about it because some of them are very funny. I remember one time we all got Bibles. Someone sent every senator a Bible.
Wow.
And it sparked me and my desk mate were just talking about like I was raised Lutheran, I was raised Catholic. We were just
Right.
talking about different versions of religion and stuff because we were like, oh, we all have or cowbells. We got cowbells, and we were like, what are we gonna do with a cowbell?
Right.
And so, sometimes
Yeah,
it's more
what do
so
you do
just
with
like,
it? Yeah.
what do we do with that? And so sometimes, it just raises the question of like what people are spending money on.
Right. There's no
Because
massive storage room out there with all these trinkets sitting around, right?
no, although if I'm looking, I was gonna say there's like a little a little uh table out there that has some of the trinkets on it
Right. Yeah.
that some of us have deposited.
I remember there's a large replica, not a regular canoe, but I remember one of the resort at lobbies had this
Yeah.
wooden canoe that they would put in all the inboxes, and it's like, whoa.
I still have mine
Yeah.
actually. It's it's up there.
Right. So, I mean, I like the idea of being funny. I think that's the best approach because um you need a sense of humor, I assume, and at the end of the day,
Yeah.
because it's
So
such
some of it's
serious
like
work.
fun. And
Yeah,
some of it kind of just like, what are we doing here?
exactly. Yeah, and how much money and what just goes into the trash. I mean, what are we contributing to ecology as well?
We did at one point have to send something back because it
It's
was too much money.
over the gift limit, or
Hmm.
interesting. Yeah.
Where they just came and rounded them all up in a box and they got sent back.
Wow. That's wild. Do you have any so like if you were to have pet peeves, and I know this is hard for someone who's in customer service to talk about that, but I mean, are there things that you would tell people don't do this, don't or things that are sort of sound when you say it are common sense, but we need to be reminded of.
Yeah, I would say one of my pet peeves is when people make assumptions
Mhm.
about why we're doing a specific thing or why we won't take a meeting. I had run into that a couple of times, specifically about needing to reschedule meetings. And so, because she has her other job and her family, sometimes, things happen where I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, she can't meet anymore. Can we try to reschedule further down the line?
Right.
And it'll happen multiple times to the same person, unfortunately, where it's like, I'm so sorry she had COVID, or like someone's sick, or, she has to go
Right.
here now. And some people will be very upset about it and think that we're just trying to shirk them and like ignore them. In reality, where I'm just like, I want to reschedule with you. something genuinely came up. And so I think that's one of my pet peeves as someone who has to work with somebody else's calendar to schedule things, is that when she's available one time, she may not be available,
Right.
once we get there. And that's just something that happens, unfortunately. And so I want people to not assume that it's because we're trying to ignore them, because that's just not what we're doing.
Yeah, in one case over the course of the last session, or one of her family members was in the hospital, and was a big deal.
It
And
was, yeah.
and she managed to sort of plow through it all, but I imagine it took a lot of effort on your part also to figure out how to make that work. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a crazy chaotic time, because it was like her young daughter
Right.
was in NICU for a little bit, and I was running around for 2 weeks just trying to get people to present our bills, or I had to like understand this bill to go tell somebody else about it so they could go talk about it in a committee so that we could get the hearing. And it was a crazy time. And so yeah, I think definitely one misconception or pet peeve that I have is definitely around scheduling and
Yeah.
what people think is happening behind the scenes.
Right.
I was like, we're a very forthright office. If I tell you something came up, I'm being genuine. Like
Right.
something came up, and we're gonna try and work with you to get you back on the calendar.
So we had a bill in Michigan this past fall. It's a good bill. And the sponsor, the primary sponsor, is going to present the bill in committee, got sick right at the day of the hearing. And the staffer stepped in and presented the bill. Is that something that's ever done in Minnesota?
Ooh, I don't know
Yeah.
if the staff would be able to step
Yeah.
in. I know other senators can.
Right.
Um, but even like we actually had to like look through like rules to make sure that when she had to be gone, that we could find people to present the bills for her, and that it was like an allowed thing. I don't know that staff would be able to do that.
Yeah. Can you imagine
No,
presenting a bill?
absolutely not.
Right. So I imagine, I mean, I'm not going to presume that this adoptee rights bill was the most memorable moment for you, because there were so many major accomplishments over the course of the last session. But what are some of your memorable moments during that session?
I will say top memorable moment was definitely trans refuge bill. Just because everybody was crying. It was just one
Yeah.
of those really beautiful moments where everyone was in tears at being able to pass such really critical and important legislation. And there's actually a very funny picture of me crying in the corner of the Senate chamber.
I think I've seen that. Yeah. Maybe we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a very beautiful picture. And then I just noticed myself off in a corner.
Right. Yeah.
There's tears everywhere. I think another memorable moment definitely came with all the abortion bills and being able to see all of those pass, because there were definitely moments where we weren't sure if each piece of that puzzle was going to get through the legislature in full, and it was good to see those get through.
Yeah.
Adoptee rights was up there just because one, as an adopted person, it's very good to see, advocacy in that arena, because I think it's something that's often overlooked. I think a lot of children's issues and like
Yeah.
just vulnerable people's issues are just generally overlooked. And so, but you also fell within that time frame of when she wasn't here.
Right.
And we had to find people to present the bill in her place for that small amount of moment. So I was in a room with another legislative assistant, kind of going over the bill with her, giving her all of our notes on it so that she could give it to her member.
I
And so that
remember that.
they
I
could
wasn't
present
there,
the
but I
bill first.
remember that process going forward like that. And it was like, oh no. And because
Yeah.
everything is so, I think people don't also understand how unpredictable some things can be. And a bill may not go forward just because of some dumb piece of luck. Like
Hmm.
someone's not there, or there's a vote that's needed and that person's sick, or um,
Absolutely. It was in the front of my head because it was just a bunch of staff members came together to kind of make sure that that bill got from one place to the next.
that was
Um,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah. So you guys were up there for us
Oh,
for our
good. Well,
office.
it's good to hear. I mean, it was a huge moment, and she was Senator McQuaid and you and everyone were just so fantastic throughout that process. Even the committee administrator for Senator Wickland's committee, that was fantastic. So really the process for me, and I'm fairly new at this, is was really remarkable to see it work, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate all that you've done. We do have a cleanup bill that's coming, just so you know, and this
Okay.
doesn't have to be part of the podcast, but HHS or the Department of Human Services has a cleanup bill, which I think it's going to be fine, but
Yeah.
it's just some minor stuff, and I imagine you're going to see a lot of cleanup bills this coming session because of
Yeah.
everything that happened last session. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I really appreciate you talking with me.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, and I may come back and talk to you again at some other issue that may come up, and I would love to pick your brain on other things. So
Okay.
yeah,
I hope I'll have something cool to say.
you always have something cool to say. Yeah. So, and I really appreciate your work. I really hope to see you maybe elected office someday, or
I
policy
won't
wonk
say
or
never. I won't say
advocate or
never.
yeah. So I wish you all the luck, and I'll follow back up if I have any questions too.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much. Take care.
Thank you. You
Say hi to
too.
the senator. Yeah.
I absolutely will.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
What Next is written and hosted by me, Gregory Luce, and is a production of Adoptees United, Inc., a national nonprofit charitable organization dedicated to equality for all adopted people. Please follow, subscribe, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts, and sign up for the newsletter at adopteesunited.org/whatnext. And consider supporting us with a tax-deductible donation at adopteesunited.org/donate. Anything you provide helps us keep the lights on. See you next time.